Hi, welcome to the Purple and Bold podcast from the Daily News Record. I'm Shane Metlid here with Catie Harper to talk everything about JMU football. It seems like we've had a year's worth of news in the week since we last recorded, and it hasn't been a year. It's just been a week. But, I was remarking to somebody the other day that it was kind of crazy that I was heading to the press conference for to announce Billy Napier as the new head coach of JMU football. And it was kind of like, oh yeah, there's also that in addition to like everything else that's happening along with the program. Normally that would be the absolute biggest story of the year. But we had other things. We had the college football playoff selection. So we'll get into all of that. Should we start with, I guess the thing that's most fresh in our minds is yesterday's press conference with Billy Napier. He's officially introduced as JMU's head coach. Coming from Florida after having great success at Louisiana. So let's just talk about Billy Napier, our first impressions of, really getting to speak to him, hear from him as JMU's head coach, and maybe just the oddity of all of it, like having that press conference while they technically still have somebody else coaching the team.
Yeah, I can't even lie. I feel like my body is starting to feel a little run down from this week. I probably don't sound my best either. I was talking to my mom last night and she's like, "You sound very stuffy right now." I'm like, it's that lack of sleep. It's catching up to me. But yesterday, it kind of felt in a way like a sprint to yesterday, and then we'll have short break, and then it will be a sprint to the college football playoff game. But yesterday, talking with Billy Napier, he seems I've been trying to find the right word to describe him. He's not a very loud person, at least with media. So it's interesting. I thought it was very enjoyable to talk to him. I thought he had some interesting answers and perspectives on kind of what brought him to JMU and why he thought JMU was the right fit for him. But he does kind of fit the build. I know a lot of the talk was obviously that it wasn't this head coach that was coming from a lower level and still trying to prove himself. That's obviously not his path to JMU. But I do think he kind of fits the build of maybe a head coach that you would expect to be at JMU. He talked about his dad being a high school coach. And if you think about, guys like Bob Chesney and Kurt Signetti, they are also sons of men who spent their entire lives coaching. So it was kind of like that little bit of a insight that I was like, you know what, that kind of fits the trend of what it seems has been looked for in past JMU coaches, is just someone that's coming from pretty much a football family.
Yeah, there definitely are those similarities. And even all those people you mentioned have different personality traits. I think you could say like nobody's the same person, nobody's a carbon copy of the other, but there are those things that are aligned with them. Like you said, they come from football families. They all have their own families. They're family men. I mean, I think, you can say that about all of them. That's important to them. And the success that they've had previously. I think, a lot of people are going to talk about Billy Napier like he was a failure at Florida. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair to say that. I mean, he didn't win national championships like some of his predecessors at Florida did. He had a winning record last year. Before this year, he beat a lot of ranked teams when he had the opportunity to do so at Florida. But ultimately, it just didn't work out there. And we can probably get into a lot of reasons why not as we get further into this. But you go back to his time at Louisiana, he certainly fits the bill of what JMU has hired before as somebody who has won championships. And I think it just says something about where JMU is now, that you go from looking for the guys who had done it at the FCS level. You're hiring your coaches from the Citadel and Elon and Holy Cross to finding a guy who had won in the same conference who wanted to be at JMU. And I think that probably reflects where JMU is now as we talk about them getting ready for the college football playoff, multiple 10 plus win seasons at the FCS level, and just everything that allowed them to make this hire.
Yeah, and I think what maybe stood out about Billy Napier too, going with, the fact that he has that Sunbelt experience, was he does come off as maybe someone who's not necessarily looking for their next job. And that's not to say that Bob Chesney or Kurt Signetti came to JMU looking for their next job. I think they came to JMU with the mindset of I'm going to coach this program as best as I can. And then eventually that next job did present itself. He talked to us media members one-on-one after the big press conference ended yesterday and had pretty much said, it's different for him and when he thinks about how long he could stay at JMU because he's already made that switch once. He's already gone from the group of 5 up to the power 4, and he also mentioned, you mentioned family, being a family guy in the sense of like having his own family. He mentioned his kids and the fact that they're at a point in their life now where those are kind of what guides him the most in these decisions. And so between that, and he said he did say too that he's made more money than he could have ever imagined in his life. So obviously JMU probably did have a little bit of a benefit to the fact that Florida is still paying this man quite a bit of money to not coach their program. So kind of those things I thought were kind of adding up to being why he was at JMU at this specific moment, just because I do think he may be able to, and he may want to bring a little bit more stability to the program in terms of having a longer run with the team.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to what JMU always kind of has to look for, or any program that's in JMU's position kind of has to look for, is a guy who really wants to coach football, wants to be a head football coach, and wants to win. And they generally see JMU as a place where they can do that. And so maybe, Bob Chesney was a pretty highly sought after guy when he came to JMU. He probably could have found $1 million a year somewhere. He took a little less than that to coach at JMU. I think probably knowing that his next job would be as high paying as this UCLA job will be. And, Napier is in a little bit similar situation. He's going to make about $1 million a year at JMU. That's just where the market is now, I think, for a JMU coach as they climb the ladder here. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, even though we already talked about, he's a little bit soft spoken, at least relative to football coaches. Here's a guy who won conference championships. He coached at Florida. Like, he could have been telling his agent, you know what? Find me a nice cushy TV job, like coming off of this Florida gig. I'll do that for a couple of years and relax. But he obviously wanted to continue coaching. He wanted to go somewhere where he could win. And he really wanted this JMU job from everything we've heard here over the past couple of days.
Yeah, he really seemed yesterday that like he wanted to be at a program where he knew he could win. And like we had talked about already, he wanted a program like Louisiana, which has historically been a good Sun Belt team. So I think he saw that as a possibility with JMU. And he also mentioned quite a bit the resources that this program has, and even extending out to the community and just the buy-in that this area has and its football program. It did seem that was something that was enticing to him to come join, just because he knows when you have, an athletic director that's willing to buy in, if you have a university president that's willing to buy in, wins can often follow that, regardless of kind of like who the coaching staff is, because they are putting an effort into finding the right head coach. But even with that, I think I think he had the right approach to talking about the fact that he is going to continue to try and learn from, the guys that were here before him. He talked heavily about Bob Chesney, about Kurt Cignetti, and how, some of the best coaches in college football right now have ties to JMU and being the program's leader. So he wants to learn from them in a sense of kind of what makes this program successful. And he kept saying, success leaves clues, and that he needs to make sure that he is using those to help guide him when it comes to running this program.
Yeah, and I think you have to keep in mind that like what makes something a good job is all kind of relative to a person's situation. If you really want to make $7 million a year, and I can't blame you if you do, but if you want that over $1 million a year, then yes, Florida is a better job than JMU. If you want stability and if you want the resources relative to the conference that you compete in, you could argue JMU is a better job. Like, JMU has a football budget that's near the top of their conference. Their overall athletic budget is at the top of their conference. They have an athletic director and a president who said, we're going to be at the top of the G5 in terms of revenue sharing and things like that. And frankly, Florida, when you dig into it, they didn't have that kind of commitment relative to where they were at. They don't spend a lot of money compared to other SEC schools on football. They had, you talk about the stability at JMU, where obviously the athletic director and the president are new, but they're replacing people who had been in their positions for a long time and don't seem like they're looking to go anywhere anytime soon. And there's just been a lot of stability at JMU. Billy Napier sat through 4 presidential changes in 4 years at Florida, which is kind of crazy to think about. As you know, it was pointed out to me yesterday at the press conference, JMU's had 4 presidential changes since 1971. That's kind of insane when you look at like how they're structured, and that's part of the reason for JMU's success overall across the entire university. The growth and everything across the entire university in the athletic department is just that there's been alignment, which was kind of like the key word yesterday that everybody kept throwing around. Is there's alignment between the administration, the board of visitors, the students, the faculty, the athletic department, and everything else. Like everybody wants the same things at JMU.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the president searches and there not being a lot. I think you could even like look across the athletic department as itself too and look at some of these different coaches that have now been here for a long time. Like both soccer coaches were hired when I was still a student, so that's already stacking up on they've been here for several years. Shelley Clays has been here for well like over a decade and a half at this point, I think, going up on 2 decades, something like that. You know, Christy Morgan has been here for a long time. Shauna Regan has been leading women's basketball for a long time. So you see these coaches that they probably have had opportunities to maybe make a jump and go somewhere that would give them a higher paycheck. Maybe Shelley Clays doesn't fall into that category because judging her contract compared to some of the other top lacrosse schools, it's actually fairly comparable. But I think you see that with just these other coaches that they are happy to stick it out at this program. And I feel like it has to start with because of the buy-in from, you know, Matt Rohn, Jim Schmidt, and the people that came before them.
Yeah, and you can like kind of argue that there's a new administration at JMU because both Rohn and Schmidt have not necessarily been on the job for a long time. But you got to keep in mind that Rohn was basically handpicked by Jeff Bourne, who was the athletic director for 25 years, and those two have a close relationship and I think similar philosophies on everything. And Schmidt comes in after Charlie King was the interim president, who had so much to do with building everything that's here, well, academically and athletically, but he has a huge role in what the infrastructure is athletically. And so he certainly had his input into who was chosen to be the next president. And like I said, alignment. Jim Schmidt seems to fit everything that anybody who cares about JMU athletics would want in their university president.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think even yesterday, kind of after all of this is wrapping up, President Schmidt is standing next to his wife and they're looking up at the crowd of people who were there. And there was a kid sitting in the stands with a Minnesota Vikings shirt on. He was several rows back and they noticed him. And, they're calling out to him, talking to him about, the Vikings and referring to the Green Bay Packers as that other team. So even like things like that, where you can tell that President Schmidt is a sports guy. And obviously that's not the only thing you want to see out of a university president, but when you look at his track record, like you said, he's definitely aligned with the program and kind of the direction that I would assume Matt Rohn wants it to go now as the athletic director.
Yeah. Beyond that, you could talk a little bit about, Napier's successes and I guess, quote unquote, failures, if that's what you want to term it as at Florida. Obviously, Florida fans always wanted to see him hire a offensive coordinator to be the play caller. And then you get a pretty strong reaction when one of the first bits of news coming out of yesterday's media availabilities was he tells Dave Riggert that, yeah, I'm going to hire somebody to call plays.
Yeah, I've seen some not happy Florida fans about that one. But I've seen some very happy JMU fans. That being said, I think he would have been fine calling plays in the Sun Belt. I do think that maybe there is a little bit of difference between that and, calling plays in the SEC, but he seems really excited about hiring an offensive coordinator that is going to handle the play calling. So I am kind of curious to see how that develops once next season gets underway, of like how much collaboration is there? Is it solely the offensive coordinator that is handling the play calling? Is Billy Napier, being a little more vocal still in the process? But yeah, there are some very angry Florida fans that decision was made now going to JMU and not made when he was at Florida. But that said, I think they may have also taken offense in that same answer, said that he was pretty much, this is like the most excited he's been for to coach in a while. So
Yeah.
yeah, there may be some angry fans about that.
Yeah, I mean, but that all goes back to what we talked about as far as like just alignment. I think he is genuinely excited about having an administration that's on the same page as he is, like going forward. And um, talking about hiring a play caller, it's not official or anything yet, but it does seem like he mentioned a couple guys. Like, there's definitely a head start on getting the staff together here at JMU, which makes sense considering this had sort of been in the works for a couple weeks now, as far as like him at least knowing he wanted this JMU job, and then he quickly became the top candidate. Definitely, I think it'll be really interesting to see who ends up at JMU, people, whether he brings them from Florida or not. We talked about, some people, he's going to bring in him and his own personnel people as far as like putting a roster together. Be interested to see how that works and how that like goes along with the people who are already at JMU, where Cliff Wood has been like the GM for the overall athletic department. I'd really like to dig more into how all that is going to be arranged compared to the way it has been at JMU. If this LaFrance person will be sort of like in the Matt Transu role of kind of like an administrator for football, or how it's all going to balance out compared to how it has been in the past.
Yeah, there's a lot that I'm interested in seeing how it plays out, because he talked a lot about retention yesterday, and he wanted to retain as many players from this 2025 team as possible, but he mentioned it about the staff as well. He mentioned that he mentioned retention of staff members. So he didn't really clue in on maybe who he was looking at or who was an option to stay on the coaching staff. So I would say maybe that is one of the bigger things that I'm also looking to see, because there are probably coaches that don't necessarily want to make that move with Chesney, and not to saying they don't want to be on Chesney's staff or whatever, but when you look at this coaching staff and how it's made up with some guys that have deep roots and deep ties to this area, they may be inclined to stay because they know that coaching at JMU could be an option, coaching at another school in this area could be an option. So I am really curious to see kind of what names may stick around that have been familiar names on the coaching staff over the last couple of years here in Harrisonburg.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, and obviously, we'll be curious to see about players. I thought it was really interesting that when Napier came over and talked to reporters, kind of like separately, he basically said like, "Hey, just be honest with me about who you're taking with you when it comes to players and stuff," which I think is a much different probably situation than it was 2 years ago when Bob Chesney took over the program, as far as like guys who were going to Indiana or elsewhere or hitting the portal, whatever. I found that like interesting, also refreshing, probably for Napier to kind of just put it out there, like, "Hey, Bob, please just tell me if you really want this guy or not." Like,
Yeah, I mean, I even put his quote in one of my stories today where he was pretty much like, just rip the Band-Aid off. Just tell me. Like,
yeah,
so I think that honesty is a big thing. And I think you would hope maybe if you're a JMU fan that you would see this honesty, since there still is a little bit of that overlap right now with Chesney still in town coaching the team through the college football playoff. But even with that and talking about retaining players, after he was done talking with us, he was walked up the stairs to where a group of current players were sitting listening. And, there are some names in that group that wanted to meet with Billy Napier that should be exciting to JMU fans, that they were there listening to what he had to say. It was, some of the few were, it was George Petaway, Camden Coleman, Mikey Scott, and Landon Ellis, all of whom have contributed at the college level or could be big contributors at the college level when you look at a player like Mikey Scott, who's still a freshman. But that's a group of people that fans should be excited that we're there and wanted to meet with him.
yeah, and I think too, like, just thinking back to a couple of years ago, there seemed to be a lot of confusion about who might be interested. I know we heard stories about the incoming staff when it was Chesney and his staff, like just waiting to hear from people and like not necessarily knowing, give people like deadlines to get back to them or answer their phone or different things. It seems like maybe this transition could go a little smoother just in that regard. Um, because like I said, Napier's basically just saying, "Hey, let me know." And I would think, from what we know about Chesney, he would be more than happy to kind of just be straightforward with where everything is.
Well, yeah, especially after listening to how Roan talked about how this coaching hire process went down. You know, Chesney was honest and upfront with him throughout it all, is what Roan said, and that, you know, I asked Matt Roan yesterday about kind of how this process went on their end, and he said that they obviously knew that there were going to be plenty of suitors for Bob Chesney and that some were going to fit him better than others. And it was one of those things that Bob Chesney kept coming back to him and telling him, "Hey, this is what's going on. This is where I'm at." And because of that, it was allowing Roan to make a list of candidates that JMU could possibly go out and get as a head coach. So I would assume, after listening to kind of how that whole process went down, which was kind of months long at this point, you would think that now with these two coaches kind of overlapping, and with Billy Napier saying that he wants to learn from Coach Chesney, I would think that that honest communication is being returned back to him about players and coaches that are going to be on their way out.
Yeah. I guess before we get into the actual college football playoff itself, any final thoughts about Billy Napier after getting to listen to him speak yesterday?
Yeah, I think it's a good hire. I can see, what drew Matt Roan and co to him, and I think he's very football focused and he loves to coach, and I think that is something that usually pans out pretty well in Harrisonburg.
Yeah. Something else that's panned out pretty well in Harrisonburg has been just the actual results on the field. We haven't sat down and done one of these episodes since last Friday night when JMU won the Selden Butt Championship, and then it seemed like that entire weekend was just a madhouse of things happening. As we get home late. I guess it was early Saturday morning from covering the
Yeah.
Friday night championship game. We get home, try to get like a little bit of sleep. For I went and covered some basketball games, and we're waiting for the Duke Virginia ACC championship game, knowing that Duke had to win that for JMU to have a chance to get into the college football playoff. That ends up being a roller coaster of emotion for JMU fans and players and coaches and everybody watching that game before Duke pulls it out in overtime. And then Sunday, we officially get the word that JMU is the 12 seed in the college football playoff, is going to Oregon to play number 5 seed Oregon Ducks. And the first Sun Belt team, the first team from the state of Virginia. A lot of firsts as JMU gets into the college football playoff.
Yeah, you mentioned doing this podcast. I wasn't even on it on Friday night. I was cramming to get quotes into the game recapping up. But yeah, God, I didn't leave the facility until after 1 a.m. That's probably why I've still not rebounded and I'm still just feeling like the Saturday. Yeah, I don't know how you made it to a basketball game. I was out of commission for most of the day. I was so tired, but I woke up fully. I was awake all day, but I was really alert finally by the time that ACC championship game kicked off and I was paying attention to it. And I just remember sitting on my couch and I had a stress ball in my hand solely because I was stressing about, okay, am I planning to travel for a bowl game or am I planning to travel for a college football playoff? And I like to have my travel plans in place right away, and I do not like the waiting process. So I'm sitting there for that game trying to figure everything else out. And wow, what an ending. Trent Hendrick told us on Sunday, he was like, I felt like I was playing in the game. Honestly, I relate to that. I felt like I was one of the athletic department staff members, like a Matt Transu trying to book a hotel for an entire team. That's my mindset during that game. But crazy game. And it was, everybody was pretty sure that JMU was going to make it into the college football playoff. But there was still that sliver of doubt that, maybe the committee is going to be the committee and make everybody question what their decision was, which can be said they probably did do that regardless of the JMU status this past year or this past weekend. But so that the watch party on Sunday morning was not open to the media, and I just I was sitting on my bed getting ready to like run out the door if they did make it in, because we had media then. And to see, I think I saw that celebration for about 5 seconds before I was out the door, because I was like running. But it was just a crazy moment. And by the time I got down to the facility, a bunch of the guys had gotten out of the watch party and the team meeting, and there was engines revving, guys were screaming, honking. It was just like a full out celebration around the APC Sunday morning. And I will say, when we left after media, there was a cop sitting in the parking lot. So I don't know if someone had called a noise complaint for all of the honking and celebrating, but it was a fun one to witness.
Yeah, I Sunday morning, since there was a women's basketball game at I don't even remember what the actual timing was, but I know like the game started about an hour after the announcement. So I went to the arena, I put my stuff there, I walked across campus to the facility, and I'm watching like on my phone as I walk across campus. I'm watching the selection show, and you know, it was kind of funny because every person I walked by, like you could see that they were kind of trying to like see if there was any news like on my phone like about it, because they could hear that it was ESPN on my phone. So I found that a little bit amusing that people were trying to kind of get an idea there. But yeah, I got there right about the time they announced it. So I saw a lot of those guys coming out of the building and celebrating and stuff. You know, it was funny. Wayne Knight, like I find it like just unbelievable how much Wayne Knight's teammates must love that guy, because like he came out, he got in his car, he was driving out, and I think it was uh now I'm trying to remember if it was Jalen Sanchez. I think it was Jalen Sanchez, or it may have been Landon Ellis. One of those two guys was like, "Oh my God, that's Wayne Knight. That's Wayne Knight's car." Anyway, that part was hilarious. But you know, he'll enjoy his hero status at Harrisonburg for a long time to come. I think, as he had that great game in the championship game, and they wouldn't be heading to Eugene without him.
Yeah, I mean, you tweeted it, but and then Landon Ellis quote tweeted it after the game about naming his kid Wayne Knight, and
Yeah,
he said, "We all are." And I think this team, especially after the championship game, I think in about like 10, 15, 20 years, there are going to be a lot of Wayne Knights and Zaire Wests around. Um, just judging by how some of these guys have reacted. But it was neat to sit down and watch the selection show too. I did listen to Dave Riggert's show with Patrick Ray and Morgan Suarez this week, and apparently Patrick Ray was not a fan of how they wanted to tell the life story of every single college football program before announcing the bracket. But it was definitely a waiting game. But you know, to see that period of the celebration, I already kind of forgot where I was going with this, but and then to hear the stories of what some of these guys were doing the night before. And you know, the ESPN was talking about the fact that Wayne Knight was on the quad, storming the quad after Duke beat UVA. And it's one of those things that when you're around this program, you start thinking, you're like, okay, Wayne Knight is a redshirt junior. He does not live on campus. He's
yeah,
definitely living in his own apartment, and he still made sure to drive to campus to celebrate with his teammates and student body. And I think I saw multiple videos on TikTok, even outside of just like the quad, of people, football players at their apartment or football players downtown watching the end of that game and the reactions. It was really neat to see, just because you kind of do know in that moment that there's a really good chance that they were going to make it. And so to then turn that into Sunday, where we're talking to Trent Hendrick and Jacob Thomas, two guys who have been at the program all 4 years, and kind of see, you know, I don't think either of them really could have ever believed that this was going to happen. They could have hoped, but the fact that it was happening, I think that was probably what was the coolest moment as a journalist, was being able to talk to two guys who've just kind of stuck it out through this program and what it meant to them to make it.
yeah. And we can, since there's a little time before this game, we can really break down the JMU Oregon matchup next week. But let's talk a little bit before we go about just the reaction to both JMU and Tulane getting into the college football playoff. I found that like both frustrating and funny at times. Just the over the top reaction to the fact that there's going to be two group of five, group of six teams in this playoff. For one thing, I feel like some of these guys who are like, you know, obvious SEC homers, why do you even care so much that's the ACC that got left out? Like, for one thing.
Bud Elliott is the only one I see that is still having a problem with it, and I do like, we follow each other, so that's why it keeps popping up, but some of these people are just, like, so mad that JMU is in, and Bob Chesney said it, he's like, "We," or maybe it was Matt Roan, I've been on so many press conferences over the last 4 days that they're all kind of merging together, but they've probably both said it, but, JMU did what it had to do to make it into this situation. They played the schedule that they were given, and they went 12-1, won the conference. That's one of the 5 best conferences. I know I've seen a lot of Notre Dame complaining, which maybe the easiest response to that is probably, "Hey, join a conference."
Yeah.
Just makes it a little easier for everybody, but it is a little interesting to see how angry some people have been about these 2 teams getting in. That said, I have now been on the side of Twitter that is almost solely Oregon and JMU fans, and there is, like, this beautiful budding friendship between both schools of just, like, there's chaos around every other thing. I think, people are mad that Tulane is playing Ole Miss again for the 2nd time this season. People are mad that, Alabama is in the college football playoff, and then the JMU and Oregon fans are just over here, like, having a great time and becoming friends. So, it definitely has been a fun thing to watch. I'm curious to see kind of how this dialogue shifts next week too, especially when it comes to JMU and Tulane, because if one of these teams loses by a lot, it's going to make it. I feel like that conversation is going to be brought up again about 2 group of 5 teams being in the playoffs.
Yeah, we'll see what ends up happening as far as like trying to change rules or anything as far as the selection goes. But you'll never be able to take this one away from JMU. They're in.
Oh God, no.
They're going to they're going to enjoy it as they're in, and like I said, next week we can really dive into the matchup with Oregon and the whole playoff bracket in general, get into the nitty gritty of the actual games, but it's been a wild ride just to get to this point.
Yeah, I do realize I only called out one person that was mad about 2 group of 5 teams going in. Just want to say that is not a direct attack. There were several people that share his mindset. He is just the one that I've seen it from the most.
He's been the most over the top with it. Paul Feinbaum, other people like
Paul Feinbaum's always going to be
on it, but it will. I don't mind calling out Bud Elliott a little bit here because like the idea that it's a safety issue for JMU to play Oregon in the playoff is ridiculous.
I missed that one.
Yeah, that was, he said it was literally a safety issue, like, but somehow it's not a safety issue when they play non-conference games in September. I don't know, but like it's a real concern right now.
The safety issue is an interesting one. I've been at quite a few practices. I've seen the size of Emmanuel Bush in person. I think they have some size to him here. That's interesting. Yeah, there's definitely been a lot. And then, oh my God, even like the athletic directors recently, we're getting a little chippy, athletic directors and like conference leaders. Like Notre Dame was taking shots at people, and then it's been a little contentious in the college football landscape recently.
It really has been, especially if you start thinking about it for the Power 5 programs, the Power 4 programs, like the amount of money that like is lost by them, like an individual team, for JMU taking Duke's spot is minuscule for them. It's like a couple $100,000 for like another ACC program that they're missing out on. It's really wild that this is the reaction that's been so strong.
And I understand why Duke made the argument it did and why Manny Diaz was kind of, I don't want to say he was taking a shot at JMU after the game, but obviously he brought up JMU because he knew that was the team that was going to get in over his program if it were to happen that way. But I don't know. I've seen a lot of ACC fans maybe get a little mad that there are 2 group of 5 teams in. I'm like, that also, you could change that on a conference level because their tiebreakers are wonky. I'm still trying to understand their tiebreakers right now. So it's definitely interesting how teams got into the conference championships. And I don't know, if you're an ACC fan, I feel like you should have known probably that, an 8-5 Duke team isn't going to beat out a 1-loss group of 5 team that won its conference.
Yeah. But like I said, we'll get back here for another episode next week where we really break down JMU and Oregon and the actual nitty gritties of the playoff. Until then, you've been listening to the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. I'm Shane Metlin. With me, as always, Catie Harper, your daily news record, JMU beat writers, where we talk about JMU sports. Thanks for tuning in.